the elections were held, and I was issued fake media credentials with United Press International, but I wasn't with United Press International. But I had forged media credentials. And during the elections, I was an election observer. The most disturbing thing I saw that day, which really sent chills, and that's when I started to realize, oh shit, like we're really in for it, was we got a call in the van. We went to a schoolyard where a bunch of young election observers, these were kids who were all my age, basically college kids. They gathered in the schoolyard because they had been another gang in another poor area of town, gang of armed thugs had showed up and had basically, they shot there was an older man with them who actually tried to guard the ballot boxes, and they shot him in the head. And so they fled. The rest of these election observers fled. And I don't know if the old man who was shot was an election observer or just a citizen who didn't want to give up his ballots. And the gang had showed up to take control of the ballot boxes. And so I remember vividly interviewing one kid who was basically my age, like interviewing someone just like myself, and he was just in a complete state of shock, just talking really fast, like, I can't believe what they did, they killed so-and-so, they shot him. And I was like, what happened? I'm trying to get facts and document things, and I just, like, that really shook me up, because that was the first time I realized, wow, like, people are going to die. By the third night on the barricades, things were really building to a crescendo. There was a tremendous amount of international pressure on the Marcos regime. A lot of international leaders, I think including the U.S. by this point, were pressuring Marcos to step down. On the barricades, we knew that he had to do something, and he had to do something really dramatic. And we were expecting it this final morning, the morning after the third night. That night, I'm on the cab. I'm sitting on top of the cab of the tractor trailer, and I remember thinking, wow. I remember looking around and realizing, wow, there were a lot more people here 2 nights ago. Our numbers seem to have thinned. Where did everybody go? I remember looking out over the horizon, realizing that the horizon's getting red, and I thought, wow, this is probably it. Something's going to happen, because something has to happen. It's the third morning now. And sure enough, I started to hear in the distance the thump, 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 this telltale sound of helicopter rotor blades. And I looked up the horizon, and I saw 8, 10, 12 helicopter gunships heading right towards my position. And the next memory I have is looking around as these helicopters, and of course I'm frantically calling on the walkie-talkie, they're coming, and I'm trying to count the number of gunships, and I looked around. I remember looking around at the people, and there was this one indelible moment in my mind, in my memory, where I looked around and I realized that most of the people around me were about to run. And I just had this sinking feeling like I'm going to be left here all by myself. And so anyway, the helicopter gunships flew right over my head to land in the camp, the military camp that was held by the rebels. And I jumped off the cab, and the next memory I have is I ran towards the camp where the gunships were landing. A bunch of soldiers came out, led by an officer who was doing this, and he had tied a ribbon around his gun. So he was defecting. And he hadn't told his soldiers they were defecting until they were in the air. Because of course he couldn't risk word getting back to any of the loyalist officers. And his men went along with it. And so instead of witnessing a bloodbath, I witnessed a bunch of soldiers coming out of these gunships and defecting, and to me that was the big turning point. I was yelling at my walkie-talkie, they're defecting. And shortly after that, a bunch of trucks and riot police and American riot police gear showed up, and they were surrounded by thousands and thousands of civilians and rebel soldiers. We had just heard that Marcos was going to leave, that the Americans were going to give Marcos a plane to fly him and Imelda, his wife, to Guam. He eventually surrendered, and all the riot police put down their gear, and everybody let out a big cheer, and then my walkie-talkie ran out of battery.